All right. I know nothing about this rookie class. Thank God we have the FSC guys to come in and teach us a thing or two. We had Avery teach me about the running back position, but I've heard wide receivers good at the top and bad below this year, which is different than what we have seen in years past where it's super deep. But I don't know. I don't know where y'all want to take this. Y'all want to just dive into tier one?
Yeah, we can dive into tier one if need be. I think this wide receiver class, the way I would describe the college football season is that the running back class we knew was already great. We knew that we were going to get these top end guys. And then we got a little bit like of cherry on top with like the Caleb Johnsons of the world or whatever. But like this year, we didn't get any cherry on top wide receivers. It was like the guys we knew were the guys we knew. And some of the guys that we thought may be good, maybe even fell out a little bit. And there was no middle class. It's like you're a top 1%er or you're maybe a day 3 wide receiver.
Yeah, it almost feels like there's 3 or 4 guys we're confident are going to be, top 40, top 50 picks. And then after that, it's like, is this guy going to go in the top 100 or is he going to go at the beginning of day 3? Like, we actually don't know once you get to the wide receiver 7, wide receiver 8 on list where the NFL is going to land on a lot of these guys.
Well, that's horrible. Can we at least go through the guys that we know are good?
Yeah, I mean, the clear standout, I think, this year, again, we'll talk about Travis Hunter in a second because it is still unclear as to whether he's going to be more of a wide receiver, more of a cornerback in the NFL. It has been reported he's going to try to play both sides, but we ultimately don't know what that snap share is going to be. Again, we'll talk about him in a second. The best pure wide receiver in this class, based off what we saw in the summer, obviously what has transpired on the field this year, I think you got to go with Tetairoa McMillan as the number 1 overall wide receiver out of Arizona. Monster year. I mean, we're talking about a guy that has been productive these last 2 years, has had over a 90 PFF grade, is being mocked as a top 5 overall pick. In fact, on NFL mock draft database, he's listed as the 6th overall player on that board right now. And at this point, he is the sure thing to be drafted in the top 2, top 3 of a lot of your rookie drafts.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with McMillan, you get a Drake London-like prospect. Like, Danny, you can highlight, well, as we go through this, you can highlight all the season they've had. I'll go through kind of the prospect model going through in the summer, what we thought of these players. And Tet McMillan was most comparable to Rome Odunze, Drake London, given the size that he has. The productivity he had as a sophomore was very similar to what London did at USC in his second year on the same field as, Amon-Ra and those type of players. So with McMillan, you got a guy that had a great sophomore year, came out as a junior, progressed some of his numbers despite the offense maybe taking a little bit of step back at times. So he's the top guy. He's going to go in the top 10 of the NFL draft.
Well, this is crazy just from pulling it up initially. This dude had over 1,300 receiving yards. The next highest player in his offense had 323.
Yeah, dominance. That's precisely what London did before his ankle injury, 8 games through his junior season as well.
Awesome. Well, I think that's what I saw on the domain draft guide on the site. I think that they had him as wide receiver 1 as well. But y'all want to talk about Travis Hunter real quick? Because I assumed he was just a corner. That's what I had heard from like NFL mock drafters and stuff, that he was going to be a defensive back.
So that's the big debate right now, is nobody really knows where he's going to be playing at the next level. I mean, Prime Sanders has talked about himself. He wants him to play both ways. He wants him to have packages on offense. We don't necessarily know what that workload is going to look like. Is he going to be a 30% snap share player on offense, or is he going to be more so in that 65 to 80% range? Like, we generally don't know what that usage is going to entail at this point. All I know is, man, when we're talking about all-time prospects, he is up there on the short list of the Deion Sanders, of the Barry Sanders, of some of the best prospects we have seen in NFL history. So what it comes down to for me is if this guy goes first overall, which I think at this point it's almost a foregone conclusion. Like, if the team picking at the top does not need a quarterback and forces a quarterback pick at 1, we're talking about the New England Patriots. We're talking about the Jacksonville Jaguars, even the Carolina Panthers. One of those teams picks at 1, Travis Hunter will be the pick. And we're talking about a guy that's going to wear a gold jacket someday, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's very difficult to decipher if he's going to be a Jaden Reed level snap share wide receiver, which to me would be like kind of his ceiling, at least in terms of like the amount of snaps he would play on offense, unless he were to come out and say, I'm barely going to play on defense or I'm not going to play on defense. I don't think that will ever happen. I think he wants to play both sides. He's going to do his best to probably play as a borderline full-time player on both sides of the ball. 60, 70, 80% of the snaps on offense, 60, 70, 80% of the snaps on defense. But you never know with NFL coaches, man. They might look at this kid and be like, you are playing corner 100% of the time. We'll make sub packages at best for you at wide receiver.
Well, if you had to rank him right now without all the information, are you putting him at 2 or are you going someone else?
No, we're going. I mean, I would go with Burden still at 2 as of now. I would actually put him at 4, knowing what I know now. But at 2, we had Luther Burden from Missouri, who his sophomore year, it reminded me so much when we just like watched the guy play. how he stacks up in the prospect model. He was a wide receiver 1 upside prospect as a sophomore. And you're looking at a guy that is on the trajectory to have a Malik Neighbors Jr. season. And he did not have a Malik Neighbors Jr. season because he didn't play with Jaden Daniels and Brian Thomas and a great offense. He had offensive struggles at quarterback. He was used mainly as kind of like a screen pass guy towards the end of his career. But when you watch the film, you understood that this guy can do everything. It's just he's going to have the tag on him throughout the draft process that he's a screen merchant or he's Laviska Shenault or Rondale Moore or whatever. He is definitely more of a film guy for his junior production than he was as a sophomore, where both film and analytics guys liked him.
Yeah, and real quick on Burden, because again, if you do look at solely his numbers this year, like Corey was mentioning, you're going to come away and be a little bit disappointed. Again, the PFF grade in 2023, 88.8. That dropped down to 78.3 this year. Again, some usage concerns. A lot of the concerns coming into the summer were, is he only a slot wide receiver? Last year in his breakout year, 81.7% of his recorded snaps were in the slot. However, when you're just talking about the metrics, 91 PFF receiving grade, 3.29 yards per route run, which was second amongst all the wide receivers we watched in the summer. We're talking about a guy also that had a 56% contested catch rate. So he could separate out of the slot. He gives you great yak ability, and he was able to come down with those 50-50 balls. When we watched him in the summer, my comps for him was kind of on the spectrum where if he did have that big junior season, I thought he could be in that talks for a Jamar Chase, a Malik Neighbors level prospect. And I thought the floor would be more so a better version of what Deebo Samuel was coming out. And again, at this point, I can't really say he's up there with the Malik Neighbors, up there with the Jamar Chase, because he did not have that junior season compared to some of those guys. Again, I know Jamar Chase didn't play his junior season, but more so the last season we saw from him coming prior to coming into the NFL. If he had that type of season, like I said, he would be up there with all those guys. But even with his floor, I mean, Deebo Samuel's been a guy that had a 1,400-yard NFL season. I do think in the right system, he lands with a Mike McDaniel perhaps. Maybe Tyreek Hill moves on after the year and the Miami Dolphins want to take Luther Burden. I think that would be the perfect fit for that type of offense.
Are you thinking draft capital-wise he's going round 2?
No, I think he'll go in round 1 still. So I just pulled this up in the prospect model. And keep in mind, I don't have his junior statistics in here. So it's just as a sophomore, which is somewhat biased because he had a better year as a sophomore, but also these are best season numbers, and it actually would probably not change that much, only the fact that he would be a junior instead of a sophomore in the model. His best comparable guys, when you pull up like early declares, plus, 3+ yards per route run, who are going to go in the first round, who also had 90+ PFF receiving grades their best seasons. You got a list of Malik Neighbors, Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, Drake London, Treylon Burks, who's not been great, and Jackson Smith and Jigba. But aside from Treylon Burks, you got pretty much all hits there.
Yeah. And side note, be on the lookout on the site for the Fantasy Stock Exchange prospect model. Really getting a big upgrade, which I'm excited for. But y'all want to dive over to wide receiver 3?
Yeah. Wide receiver 3 for both of us, I believe, in the summer. And still wide receiver 3 for me is Ohio State's Emeka Egbuka, who was projected to be in last year's class, who probably would have been, top 5 receiver had he not had a brutal junior season of injuries and, things of that nature. He definitely bounced back this year, which is exciting to see, because when you look at what the guy did as a sophomore, everybody gets excited about the 5-star prospect or the former 5-star recruit who went on the same field as Marvin Harrison Jr. and produced like a 23% target share, had a very good season for a great Ohio State offense. And he got back to that player in 2024, which is
yeah, and in the summer when we did watch him, I had him comped to a guy like DJ Moore in the NFL, where he was more so that late first-round pick. Obviously gives you that yak ability in the short area, but is able to be tough out in the middle of the field, come down with those contested catches over the middle of the field. I mean, we saw that on display in these last couple of years. Again, it is a concern in his 2023 season that he did face the injuries, and people might be looking at his pure box score in 2024. 824 yards, 9 touchdowns, like not a great significant line, but there's still a lot of context behind that. I mean, first and foremost, you're looking at the Ohio State wide receivers, man. When you got Jeremiah Smith, when you got Emeka Egbuka, when you got Carnell Tate, they're not going to have one guy that's going to go out there like a Tet McMillan and have 1,400 yards. So with Emeka Egbuka, like I said, I think he profiles in that late first, early second round area. And like a DJ Moore, man, he could really establish himself as a top 15 level wide receiver in fantasy.
Yeah, that was my next question, is with the Ohio State receivers now, is it like the same level of target competition that we've seen from Ohio State for like the past 5 years?
Maybe, well, I mean, this year you got Jeremiah Smith coming in and like
Next
other
Julio
5-star
Jones.
prospects. It kind of just is always going to be that way at Ohio State. Like maybe it's not Garrett Wilson, JSN, Chris Olave level where they're all first round receivers, but they're all going to be talented players. And it is a rather lazy comparison to say that his prospect profile is identical to Chris Olave's, but his prospect profile is identical to Chris Olave.
It's very similar. Yeah.
Awesome. And then you said Travis Hunter would be wide receiver 4 if you had to draft today. Obviously, that's subject to change a bunch. But who would be the 5th option?
So he just declared last week. I didn't know if he was going to be in the class, altogether. But Alo Manor from Stanford was my wide receiver 4, excluding Travis Hunter, entering the college football season. He had a little bit of an up and down season as far as like consistency is concerned, but like everybody probably remembers that he went for like 200 yards against Travis Hunter in Colorado last year, 1 year removed from a torn ACL as well. And when I watched him as a Bucs fan, he reminded me so much of Chris Godwin that it was hard to take my eyes off that comparison. Chris Godwin or like more athletic Michael Pittman were what he kind of reminded me of, because he's like this big physical power forward style wide receiver. But unlike Michael Thomas or Michael Pittman, he's got some actual speed to him. Like he's got like probably 4.48 kind of speed to him. So yeah. I think Alo Manor is going to be a guy that is a riser. I just saw that he accepted an invitation to the Senior Bowl as well. So I think the NFL is really going to like him. And that's why I kind of have, and like the film is really good too. Like I know the film guys really like him. So he's the type of prospect that like, if I had to give you a level of where he stacks up as a sophomore in the prospect model, we're talking more so on the level of a Chris Godwin, a Curtis Samuel, a Tyler Johnson, a Jameson Williams, a George Pickens, a guy that is almost certainly going to be an early day 2 pick more than a first round pick.
Yeah, top 50 guys about the expectation. Like we said, the top guys, there's about 3 or 4 guys that we can talk about being as legitimate top 50 picks. I think Alo Manor is one of the final of that group. With Alo Manor, when we came into the year, the notes that I had on him, fantastic hands, very powerful after the catch runner, perfect for that big slot, current modern day role that we see from the NFL, that we see being utilized in the NFL today. And some of the weaknesses that I have were some of the separation ability, a little bit of a lack of fluidity when he's in space. Those are the main weaknesses that I had. But ultimately, like I said, you're getting that power forward. You put him in the slot. He's going to give you tough yards. He's going to give you yak ability. And like we said, I mean, if you watch that game against Colorado, actually last year, he took it to Travis Hunter. We'll just say that.
Yeah, and I obviously want to put a big asterisk on this video and that this is super early on, and don't be holding the FSC guys to these rankings when we get all the additional data points with the combine and stuff.
Full tape study is going to be happening for us on the 2024 season. We're watching 4 or 5 games of each of these guys, giving a comprehensive top 10. Again, this is more of an early look based off some of our scouting notes, based off maybe what transpired in the 2024 year. But if you guys are Flock Fantasy subscribers, all of those rankings are going to be updated throughout the summer.
Where is the teardrop between like the guys that we know are going to be at least day 2 picks down to where they aren't guaranteed that round 3 draft capital?
So I tend to think that there's like 1 or 2 more guys in the Alo Manor tier where I can say comfortably that they should be day 2 picks, but are they going to be 2nd round picks? Are they going to be 3rd round picks? Correct. Are they going to be the 44th pick or the 79th pick or the 102nd pick and barely get inside the 3rd round? Like, I think there's a couple guys in the range of Alo Manor and Alo Manor himself was a tier break from Emeka Egbuka and Hunter if he plays wide receiver and the other 2 guys. So it's a range where the combine is going to determine a lot. What the NFL, draft community thinks is going to determine a lot. Do they think this is a bad wide receiver class? Do they think it's a decent one? I think generally because wide receiver is a valuable position in the NFL, unlike running back, you're still going to see some of these guys go on day 2, maybe that don't even deserve to, just because that's how the wide receiver position works. But in my mind, there are a few more guys that we could bring up here in the Alo Manor range.
Yeah, I mean, the first one that I know the NFL draft community is going to like a lot more than the fantasy community. It's funny because we're talking about, guys like Henry Ruggs in the past, Waddle in the past, where the production profile wasn't really there, but based off that natural speed, that ability to really stretch vertically, we do see them pushed up in NFL prospect circles. And I think that guy this year is Isaiah Bond of Texas. I mean, you are a Texas fan, Corey. I mean, you are a Texas fan, Mason. You guys actually are both Texas fans. But with Isaiah Bond, He filled into that Xavier Worthy role this past year, obviously transferred from Alabama. Not the greatest in terms of the overall box score for him, but I do think the NFL is going to like him. And if any other wide receiver in this class is going to join the Tet McMillan, Burden, Emeka Egbuka, and possibly, Travis Hunter if he plays wide receiver in the next level in that first round area, I think the NFL would draft Isaiah Bond there.
Yeah, I think he's a weird prospect though, because his prospect profile just like isn't good, like objectively. Yeah. Like his best season at Alabama, 671 and 4 touchdowns playing with Alabama quarterbacks. And then he goes to Texas where Quinn Ewers is a draftable quarterback and he has 532 and 5 touchdowns. Like, yes, he filled the role of field stretcher for Xavier Worthy, but he did not fill the production of Worthy. And then we also lost Mitchell and we also lost Sanders, and like the receiver production should have been better, I guess is my point for Isaiah Bond.
Yeah, I mean, you can say the same thing about Adonai Mitchell last year, though, and he still got the round 2 draft capital. I mean, if you're the athlete and NFL teams think you can stretch defense,
exactly,
they're going to take you.
Yeah, like his prospect profile stacks up to the likes of like a KJ Hamler, a Terrace Marshall, a Dwayne Eskridge. Like this is the tier of prospect we're talking about, which the model suggests that, and this is again sophomore production, but it didn't get that much better this year. The model suggests he should be like probably a 4th round pick, but because he's going to test really well, most likely, he's probably going to go at least in the 2nd round, if not potentially in the 1st.
Yeah. And it's like the perfect example of like the receiver that can help an NFL team a lot more than a fantasy team. Like Jamison Williams, phenomenal real life receiver. In fantasy, it's kind of whatever because you don't get the volume.
Yeah, wide receiver 3. And I mean, like that's in his best season this year. So I think that's actually a really good comparison. Again, I obviously Jamison Williams does bring a little bit more size, did already test in the 4.2s. And again, I have no doubt that Isaiah Bond will also test in the 4.2s, but we did see that productive season before Jamison Williams came out, whereas we haven't really seen one from Isaiah Bond.
Well, y'all said there's one more guy that still's like guaranteed day 2 capital at least.
Yeah, so I think there's a few guys that I think have been very productive this year that are more like you got to hope that they're Tank Dell kind of thing because they're undersized slot receivers. That's Xavier Restrepo and Tez Johnson. They're both on very good teams. They've gotten a lot of public, love because they're on great teams. But they're, from a fantasy perspective, we might be like concerned that all they end up becoming is Marvin Mims or whatever. You know what I mean? Like they're going to be difficult evaluations. For me, the next guy that I think has legitimate upside that we're all maybe going to be excited about come April when we have more information is Trey Harris from Ole Miss, because Trey Harris from Ole Miss has a good prospect profile and has redeeming qualities on film, played for a big school, has the size, will have the athleticism. I think when we're Frankensteining out wide receiver prospects in a class like this, where after the first 4 to 5 guys, you kind of need to do that. Trey Harris stacks up to me as one of the more interesting players. And when I stacked him up as a junior, I guess, in the prospect model going into the year, he was very much in the range of wide receiver 3 upside prospects, like a Michael Thomas, for example, or like somebody like that. We're talking, a solid day 2 wide receiver.
Yeah, and the thing with Trey Harris, and he's going to be very polarizing. I can already tell you right now, the fantasy community will look at his metrics, will look at his efficiency in that Ole Miss offense, and they're going to be ranking him a lot higher than the NFL draft community will. Again, us personally, we did really enjoy watching Trey Harris, but we have heard, some big media NFL guys that have him closer to that wide receiver 10, wide receiver 11 range. And I understand there are some concerns with the Ole Miss offense, but when I did watch him in the summer, my comp for him was a guy like Michael Gallup. Again, does he have a little bit of concern in terms of that raw separation ability? Sure. But when it comes to the catch point, when it comes to producing in terms of the overall efficiency, we're talking about a guy last year that was at 3.17 yards per route run, 89.6 PFF receiving grade, and only up those numbers this year. We're talking this year from an efficiency perspective for him, he took a big step up. We're talking this year, 89.9 PFF grade and 1,030 yards in 8 games played. So the production is there, the efficiency is there, the yards per route run is there. The main question I have for Trey Harris is where the NFL lands on him. Is he going to be a round 4 pick because they have concerns of the Ole Miss offense and the separation overall ability, or are they going to value the guy that just was simply productive?
Yeah, real quick question. This kind of goes with this. When do y'all start valuing the data points that we get from NFL mock draft database? Like they currently have Trey Harris as like the 5th receiver in these mock drafts on their consensus big board, but is this something to not even pay attention in December? It's like, we're not going to really see it until March, April.
Yeah. So Most of the people doing mock drafts this time of the year, I would say, are dynasty focused or are fantasy player focused. Whereas the NFL draft community, they're going to start bumping players up and down. Because if you look back at this time of the year last year, Troy Franklin was probably like the 36th pick or something like that. You know what I mean? So one quick last point on Trey Harris. His 5.15 yards per route run this season is the best in the mock in the prospect database. It's the single best mark. Like, it's better than Devontae Smith's Heisman season.
He had over 5 yards per route run.
5.15 yards per route run this year.
Fantasy community is going to love him. I'm telling you right now.
Schematically, there's concerns with why he got to that number because the Ole Miss offense is rather Mickey Mouse, and that's why people have issues with Jackson Dart as a quarterback prospect as well. But 5.15 yards per route run, the next like best ones there, we're talking Dwayne Eskridge, who was in like a MAC conference, which doesn't really count. Devontae Smith is the only other like SEC wide receiver that we've seen post over 4. And he had 5.15.
Yeah. And Smith, in my opinion, is the best college football wide receiver I've ever seen.
Yeah, he's definitely one of them. So Harris is like, you can poke holes in his game and be like, oh, he doesn't like separate on a dig route the way that you'd maybe want him to. Like, that's what NFL draft community film analysts will do to him. But I'm like, dude, 5.15 yards per route run? Like, that's an absurd number.
Yeah, I know. We do see that reflected. You mentioned his ranking on NFL Mock Draft Database, 43rd overall, peak at 39. When we do go to PFF, we do see 79th overall, ranked 68 ADP. So he's going to be a polarizing figure. I do think the fantasy community is going to, as a consensus, rank him as a wide receiver 4 or wide receiver 5 in this class. For me, again, like a Troy Franklin, like Corey pointed out earlier, I'm curious where the NFL lands on him.
Awesome. Well, do y'all have anybody else here we want to talk about?
I can give a couple quick shouts just because the prospect model did really like Elijah Surratt of Indiana going into the season based on his like James Madison numbers. And then he went to a school which like literally just played a college football playoff game. So he got some much better competition that he was just dealing with. And he posted improvements pretty much across the board. So I have not put him junior wise into the prospect model yet, but I am very excited to see where he stacks up, because you take a small school prospect with good analytics, you put them in a big conference and they actually produce and they actually live up to that. That's an interesting prospect in my mind. So that's somebody that I'm excited to see where they stack up. And like, I mean, there was guys that disappointed, which is unfortunate because we kind of needed a few guys to step up in this class. Like Antoine Wells from Ole Miss, the other receiver there, didn't have a great season. Nick Anderson, who I was really excited about from Oklahoma.
There's one guy for me.
He was the freshman of the year. He's going to go back to school, I think. So that's a little bit sketchy. We also have the possibility that some of these guys do go back to school because we're not past the declaration date as of this current recording, but there's still guys that are interesting at this point in time. I think Jaden Higgins from Iowa State is interesting as well. There's guys, Evan Stewart, we haven't even mentioned yet, from Oregon. There's no way he comes out of school, right? There's no way he actually comes out for the draft this year.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what's going on with Evan Stewart. For reference, if you guys have been following the recruiting trail, this was a guy that came in as the number 1 overall receiver, 5-star recruit to Texas A&M. Didn't really live up to expectations there. Goes to Oregon this year. Also didn't live up to expectations.
613 and 5 touchdowns on that offense is it's worse than what Bond did, honestly, because Bond should have been more productive than he was. Evan Stewart had no excuse to not put up 1,500 yards and 10 touchdowns this year, in my opinion.
Yeah. And you mentioned Jaden Higgins. So again, very, very productive year, almost 1,200 yards, I believe 9 receiving touchdowns. So he's a big name as well. My guy, and again, Corey knows exactly who I'm going to be talking about, but going into the summer, I really liked Ricky White out of UNLV. He had another productive year this year. It was a year that, if you look at it compared to his last year, you're going to look at it, well, he went down in yards. What's going on there? The first 4 or so games of the year, the quarterback position at UNLV, again, what ended up happening, there's a whole debacle. A quarterback who was promised something by the program didn't end up getting it. He ended up leaving. After he left, we're talking about like a run-first quarterback not putting up a lot of passing volume. After he left, Ricky White with the new quarterback ended up being an absolute monster down the stretch. We're talking since that game, I believe it was after week 3, 10 for 127, 10 for 135, 7 for 138, 9 for 88. Like, we're seeing a ton of production at the tail end of the year. And when you look at his last year, 88 receptions, 1,483 yards, 8 receiving touchdowns. And even when you look at his true freshman year, again, this has been a guy has had a little bit of off-field concerns, transferred from Michigan State, A lot of stuff in the burners, which could really be a Jermaine Burton case, which is the concern here. However, again, we have seen production from Ricky White. We didn't really see that from Jermaine Burton. And in his true freshman year for Michigan State, he had one game against Michigan. We're talking, at the time, a number 13 ranked Michigan team. As a true freshman, 8 catches, 196 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. So Ricky White, depending on where his draft capital lies, he could be a day 3 pick, round 5 pick, and we could be talking about him as a sleeper UDFA pickup. Or we could be talking about him, he sneaks into round 3, and he's more so that rookie second, rookie third round pick that I want to be taking my shots on, because I do think there's a lot of talent there.
Yeah. I don't want to skim over Jaden Higgins really quick. I need to hammer this point home. If we're going to get a 4th or a 5th receiver that emerges who becomes very relevant, it will be Jaden Higgins, in my opinion, because he's 6'4", 215. Everybody loves that size for fantasy. His best comparable, his junior season, was Nico Collins in the prospect model, his best comparable player. Because of the size, because of the athleticism. Here's what he did, and this factors into the prospect model, which is why I know he's going to score good in it after I put his senior season in here. Eastern Kentucky, his first 2 years. Productive, right? It's Eastern Kentucky. Who gives a shit? Next up, he goes to Iowa State in 2023. 80 targets, 983, 6 touchdowns, 86.6 PFF receiving grade, 3.00 yards per route run. Those are all very strong numbers for a guy in his first year in a big conference. This year, he built upon those numbers, which factors into the prospect model that is going to be a positive in his category as well. 130 targets, 1185, 9 touchdowns, 90.5 PFF receiving grade. Generally, the threshold you want to hit is 90. So the fact that he got over 90 this year, still had 2.66 yards per route run, all 4 years of his college career, over a 50% contested catch rate, especially given that size. That's an important metric to hit. Doesn't drop the ball, has nails hands. Like, he is a guy that once the draft cycle is over, once we go through the combine, the pro days, all that stuff, would it shock me right now if nobody's talking about Jaden Higgins as a first-round pick, but he is a first-round pick, April 29th or whatever? It would not shock me.
Awesome. Well, I now know a little bit more about these guys that I've never heard of. So thank you. I really appreciate it.
For sure.
Thank you for having us.